Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mu'mina Faour. I have experience for over 18 years in the media, in the economic department especially. I worked between Saudi government TV, CNBC Arabiya, Sky News Arabiya, and now for Business 24. We will be talking about the bankability of renewable energy projects. We will review the latest of best practices of controlling project risks and securing revenues and putting in place adequate lender protection to ensure that lenders can be comfortable providing debt finance on a non-resources or limited resources basis. Our event seeks to bring together varied perspectives to share experiences on stewardship of the energy transition and to highlight the investment opportunities in the sector to the investors in the audience. Of course, I will welcome the panelists on the stage. I will welcome Mr. Maher Al-Ka'bi. He is a visionary leader and a seasoned banker for over 29 years of experience in the banking, IT industry, and family business. He has extensive expertise in board membership, Islamic banking, wholesale and consumer banking, risk management, finance, operation and technology, sales and distribution, and business development. He also has deep knowledge of innovation and trends in the generation and utilization of data sets and new technologies. Serves on the board of several startup companies as a chairman of the board of governance of a Star International School and co-founder of Blink. Currently, he is an advisor to the group chairman of Al Sirkal Group of companies, more than 165 years old family, and serves as an independent board member. He advises board on developing a more structured governance model and reviewing and refining the structure of the group to create more flexible, robust and efficient organization that we will be better placed to respond to future business opportunities. He also applies his expertise in transitioning businesses digitally. Works also extensively with various ministers in future technologies, circular economy, and sustainability of family businesses. He has worked as a group head of Islamic banking at Emirates NBD and also served as a group head chief operating officer for a group wholesale banking. Previously, he worked as the chief risk officer at Dubai Bank. And before that, he worked at Citigroup for over 14 years, where he assumed various senior roles both locally and internationally. Welcome on the stage, Mr. Maher.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, I would like to welcome on the stage Mr. Mohsen Abu Bakr. He is the general manager of NBE in SMEs sector. He has more than 25 years experience in finance, and through this period, he held many positions, such as relationship manager with large and SME corporate clients. Managed the period, he held many positions in technical assistance for SMEs units. Also established and participated in many new businesses lines like product developments, MFIs, and SME segment support. He participated in setting credit programs and managed international funds related environmental and energy, like replacement of old taxis with the new ones, works with natural gas, Egyptian pollution abatement projects, EPAP, Environmental Compliance Project, and Green Economy Finance Facility, GEFF, Clean Development Mechanism, CDM. Mohsen is a trainer and a consultant, financial and non-financial services. He has local and international certificates in finance, such as SMEs Banking, Certificate, Credit Course, Future Leaders Program. He participated in many study tours and represented the National Bank of Egypt at many conferences in Egypt, USA, Germany, Switzerland, Morocco, South Africa, Kenya, and Angola. Welcome on board, Mr. Mohsen.
Thank you.
Finally, I would like to welcome on stage Ms. Dolapo Kokoyi. She is the managing partner at Detail Commercial Solicitors and leads the firm's energy, infrastructure, and power practice, and has extensive experience advising clients on a wide range of complex transactions. Her professional experience spans across energy, power, gas, and renewables, project development, project finance, infrastructure development and finance, corporate commercial and transaction, and mergers and acquisitions. She is one of the leading energy lawyers in Nigeria, having worked for government agencies, regulators, and private parties, institutionals, investors, and financial institutions. Ms. Dolapo combines her strong legal background and industry knowledge to add value to each transaction, and her attention, of course, to the interests of every brief sets her apart as a pillar of support of clients. Dolapo also an avid speaker and thought leader, and passionate about encouraging the advancements of women in professional and business circles and increasing energy access in Nigeria and across Africa by leveraging private finance with the use of viable business and project models. Welcome on board, Ms. Dolapo.
You can come closer.
I would like... Yeah, sure. Of course, we're talking about renewable energy projects. I would like at the beginning to ask a question. What is the impact of renewable energy projects on finance and on the environment itself? Let's start with Mr. Mohsen. Maybe there are many projects in Egypt that you would like to talk about.
Yes, first of all, thank you for your invitation. And I hope to be successful exhibition and conference. The renewable energy is a high positive impact for environmental and also for economic. For the economic impact, relying on renewable has a strong economic impact as it helping reducing the emission, and also using that compare with traditional energy sources, which in many countries represent a major portion of imports. And on another level, renewable field create many jobs. For all the parts of ecosystem of renewable energy. And for the environmental impact, typically energy production is a large contributor of greenhouse gases emission amongst all the economic activities. And the mix of energy include green energy would significantly cut the generated of emission. Moreover, banks, I mean the international banks, donors, and development banks, and also the local banks, as a part of financial system, have to provide financial solutions suitable for the financial needs for renewable energy sector.
Mr. Maher, there are like many projects in UAE, sustainability, renewable energy projects. Of course, you have an addition to tell us the impact of this project on the economy of UAE and also the environment.
Sure. I think if you go broadly in terms of the impact, environmental and also economic, adding to what Mohsen have also said, apart from job creation, you're talking about economic impact in terms of the land. When the land is being used, these are private lands at times, not really governments. So even those people, landowners, tend to benefit from these lands. So that's another impact that you have. The other important impact in an industry where you have energy really expensive. So when you come up with renewable energy, which is really the cost is reducing over the last 20 years now, so that's an additional economic impact. So you're actually, for the end users, they're paying lesser amount of money in terms of the energy they want to use vis-a-vis the current energy prices. So that's another impact in terms of economic value of it. If you look at the environmental part of it, in addition to what Mohsen has mentioned, we all know the energy which is produced using a fossil fuel take a really huge land. And when you actually convert it to renewable energy, it sometimes does not really require a huge land. So you actually conserve land. So you protect the land as well. Another impact to that thing, we all know the fossil fuel industry requires a lot of water into the operation of the whole thing. I've seen too many plants, I've been to many plants, whether they're nuclear even, which is a clearer energy, requires a lot of, for the fusion to happen, you require a lot of water cooling to happen. So you save water by going to renewable energy. So that's another important save. And water, as a lot of people believe, is going to become a scarcity. I don't believe that, because water is water. Water going to remain in the planet, is not evaporating out of the atmosphere. But you're conserving water at the end of the day for a better use. Another environmental impact, you're actually lessen the deforestation of the land, so you make sure that your biodiversity stays there. So when you don't occupy the land, your biodiversity will actually be there.
Can you give us some examples of financing those projects, like
Sure.
either international, locally or internationally?
Okay. First, let's provide a macro picture, and then we get into some of the project terms. And I think the previous talk by the gentleman from US was a good segue to tell you how much amount of project financing really required in terms of amount. And of course, this is one of the latest report by KPMG, PwC, Applied Material as well, just came out beginning of this month itself. And they're varying numbers. In 2021, they estimated the finance amount required is about $3.65 trillion.
Wow.
Now, it is estimated for up to 2030, we require anything between $22 to $35 trillion, and some reports takes it to the high level saying it will require $50 trillion if we really want to hit the 2050 target of net zero. I don't believe we're going to hit the net zero by 2050, but that's a topic for another time to discuss.
Which year do you think that they will reach?
It's the crystal ball question. Yeah. I really would like to challenge any government official, if they really know when they're going to achieve it. It's going to be very difficult because the production of energy is going in a faster pace than what we actually, with the renewable coming in. Look at the economic growth, how it's happening. I know we're going through a financial slump at this point of time, but the energy requirement, because of the population growth, demand will increase by an average of 20% per annum. Oh. So your renewable energy is not increasing by that. It is still at a smaller pace, so it's about like 8% to 10%. So that's mean the gap gonna widen. I really don't know how we're gonna achieve net zero by 2050. If people are not honest, that's not gonna happen. If we zoom back to the region of GCC in terms of how much money or financing required, in 2021, we spent $605 million.
Okay.
In 2022, we spent $8.5 billion. That's almost more than 13 times more. That tells you the acceleration rate the region is actually leading today. Of course, there was other panel in the morning also talked about a report about how the Asian market going to be leading the energy advancement, which is a fact, by the way, led by China and India, given that these are mass countries, a lot of population, so the requirement is higher over there. But we all know, those who've been in UAE, that we've not been talking, in UAE, we were not talking about the energy and renewable energy from now on or 5 years ago. We've been talking about it for almost 16 years. We've been actually implementing it 16 years ago. So if we zoom into the UAE now, after the GCC, we're kind of been investing in it for 16 years. And Masdar is one of the, I think, iconic city that everybody knows. Not only they're investing locally, but they're investing in international startups. So they're trying to create an ecosystem wherever there is a good idea, they're actually going out after it, incubate them, support them financially, so these ideas can be supported everywhere. So if we talk about Dubai and Abu Dhabi, some of the projects that we have, and I think Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park, probably you guys know that thing. Dubai and Abu Dhabi or UAE is home to one of the largest solar panels globally. Abu Dhabi is the largest solar panel producer, for those who don't know. I mean, I didn't know that 10 years ago till I went and saw what Masdar is trying to do. Yes. So the Mohammed bin Rashid solar panel, their objective at Dubai is how do we become our energy at 75% coming in from renewable by year 2050. And solar panel, the solar park, is one of those avenues that we're going to build up to come up with a 5 gigawatt overall energy. Wow. Similarly, 5.6 gigawatt coming in from Abu Dhabi itself. So UAE is really in forefront in making that happen. And it does not emanate because that there is a COP27 or COP28 coming up. Trust me, these things were happening for almost a decade and a half. Emanating that, we need to preserve the environment. We need to make sure that we all go to alternative resources of energy.
I have so many questions about this stuff,
sure.
But I don't have the time to get back to it. Maybe later. I would like to have some comments from Ms. Dolapo about your experience in Nigeria and in Africa overall about financing renewable energy projects.
Thanks. Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here. I think looking at Africa regionally, it was very interesting to hear about all that's been happening in Egypt, for example. When let's dimension it into north, south, east, and west. So North Africa, when we hear about what's happening in Egypt and the numbers in terms of how much they're doing in terms of renewables as compared to what's happening in the west, there's still a huge disparity. We have a lot of success in South Africa to an extent, even though they still have load shedding, because they still have a huge reliance on coal and other sources. But South Africa took off years ago because they had a procurement program in which they then were able to put in wind and bring in solar. Looking at the east, we are looking at Kenya. Kenya will be one of the winners, who is mainly renewable, and then most of it is, but still a small country if you are looking at Nigeria in comparison. And with Kenya, it's more geothermal, which is still in development, but more wind and some solar. So when we come to West Africa and Nigeria, what are we seeing in terms of financing? So with the other countries I've spoken about, Egypt, you've seen investment coming, and I'm talking about privately financed investments in solar. You've seen it coming in wind. You've seen in Kenya as well. You've seen investment coming with the Lake Turkana project, for example. You see investment going in solar as well. And now coming to West Africa, specifically Nigeria, we haven't yet reached financial close in terms of renewable energy projects. Our renewables are more hydro. Our big renewables are more hydro. And those are hydro projects that have been there for years. We do have 2 big hydro projects that are still in the process of being concessioned, but they were not privately financed, they're government funded. But there are more interesting things happening in the mini-grid side in terms of what's happening in decentralized energy. There's a lot of activity there and a lot of financing. So where you look at either the mini-grid space, where you look at the commercial and industrial space, there's a lot of financing going there. And it's a mix of concessional financing, a mix of corporate financing on the back of, companies who have done a lot of work providing small, in terms of renewable energy service or energy as a service to commercial entities such as banks. For example, you have 2 major companies, one Daybreak, which has just been bought over by Shell, who provides a lot of energy as a service to the commercial sector, like banks. You also have industries as well, who have been able to fund, some of their, on the back of their own balance sheets, and we're getting some project finance in that space as well, in terms of increasing, their own share of, in this case, solar. So we have interesting, interesting financing happening there. But in terms of grid scale, we are still on that journey. And I know that during the Nigeria session, we did hear contributions from some of the audience coming to talk about our major solar projects, which still haven't reached financial close, and there are reasons why we haven't. But I think looking at Africa as a whole, whether with the more successful countries or with the less successful countries, I think a few things come to mind. One is the fact that most of us as African countries still do not produce the inputs that are required. We are still very import dependent, which means that we are foreign exchange dependent. And that in more current years has become an issue because a lot of countries have faced a lot of foreign exchange fluctuations and a lot of foreign exchange risks, in the sense that revenues do come in local currency, but you then have to fund these projects, in foreign currency. So a lot of countries are having to deal with that, and then in some countries you then have them having some form of oversupply, and trying to manage between oversupply and meeting their project obligations. You also have the issue around, just the projects themselves and having those projects come to scale, particularly what it is that government needs to do to guarantee, those, the bigger projects, that's the utility scale projects. For Nigeria, for example, I know that one of the major issues to funding is, government providing guarantees. Sovereign guarantees is one of the really big issues. And it's a continual balancing act between government knowing that there's a need to provide this power and to be able to bring these projects through, and then, the demands, or would I say the requirements of lenders and investors, because they need to be able to see that government can actually meet its obligations. So it's always a chicken and egg. But I would say that on the Nigeria side, we're having more interesting things happening on the mini grids and on the commercial and industrial side. You're also seeing a lot of performance-based grants. We've had a lot of investment from the DFI community, where they are actually putting in technical assistance, to catalyze some of these projects. So I'll stop there.
If I talk about the foreign exchange, convertibility and availability risk, what would be the best practice and study case for foreign exchange risk?
Sure. I think you've just heard what he called sharing about the challenges in foreign exchange. But we also need to acknowledge, and just generally before I answer your question, that Africa, as per se, are not really a carbon emitter vis-a-vis many industrial countries. So really hats off to them that they're still working out in renewable energy when they are probably the least producer of carbon emission, similar to the Far East, some of the Far East countries. So that's something really to be applauded and what they're doing. To go back to the foreign exchange risk, I think this is a challenge, particularly in countries, and almost everywhere, to be honest with you, when the financing is of a different currency and the revenue of different currencies. Some of the classical things being used by banks is the hedging the foreign exchange risk through various contracts, like in a forward contract, and options using, a swap using. A forward contract is a very simple thing that you go actually do a forward contract with a bank for a future transaction you want to do, and you lock the exchange rate from now on so you avoid the fluctuation. Similarly, there are a bit more derivative, explicit transaction are there by using the options and swap. But forward are the main used. The other thing is, as a hedge of currency used, and we see a lot of players are using it, actually financing in a local currency.
That's right.
But that may not be accessible to a lot of principal or other project owner because the liquidity might not be available in the respective currency. So that's why sometimes to resort to international currency, but that option is available. So in UAE, for example, the largest project, one of the largest projects, ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, they actually issued bond and sukuk in a local currency just to minimize their FX transaction. Even EGA, Emirates Global Aluminium, one of the largest aluminum producers in UAE today, they've also resorted to a local currency as well. Majid Al Futtaim, the biggest retailer, they also resorted to local currency, but they also resorted to implementing a central treasury, and it's a very key thing. So a lot of big corporates sometimes take time before implementing a central treasury. A central treasury does not really eliminate the risk, but manage the risk for you in terms of FX by making sure that your cash is concentrated in a pool, so you're able to see your inflows and outflow, and you manage your financial, what do you call, your risk from that perspective. So these are some of the tools that are available, and I think going back to the Lapo points as well, the political risk. So sometimes people opt for political risk insurance. Now, political risk insurance are little bit expensive instruments for an insurance company to provide you, but that gives you a hedge against, and if you're not able to convert your foreign exchange from the local currency, so that what you call risk insurance premium can come in to help you. But these are very, what you call, expensive tools from that perspective.
Of course, of course. Would you like to add any addition to this topic?
Yes, so the traditional solutions are, local, like, for example, partial risk guarantees and all of that, which are expensive, or if you're looking at hedging, that's quite expensive. But more recently, I think, as my fellow panelist has said, one of the things that we begin to see now is a deepening of local currency financing. And sometimes that local currency financing is usually backed by foreign currency placed as a guarantee. So you are beginning to see structures where you have international investors who are willing to put in some kind of foreign currency guarantee to act as a guarantee and back up any foreign currency costs, but as much as possible leverage that pool of money to be able to get in local currency. And what we even see, we're seeing more of, and it's growing even in Nigeria and in parts of Africa, is also going into the capital markets. So we know that at least in Nigeria we have, pension funds in the trillions, and we do have organizations, for example, like an organization called InfoCredit, who are now trying to leverage our pension funds to be able to access some of that money. It's not, I would say that we are not where we will be getting the kind of funds that would fund these big utility projects. And I think that we need to probably be more innovative, as we go along. But it's a good start because it's obvious with the way things are going in the world, and with dwindling foreign exchange revenues from our governments, that being foreign exchange reliant is not sustainable. But the other thing is the basic just hedging your risks by the contract. So in smaller projects, what you would see, which has its risks on the end users themselves, but in the smaller projects, what you'd see is that the power purchase agreements will be reactive to foreign exchange movements or to any foreign exchange inputs that are likely to rise. So you see that as well, but it's always a balancing act.
Mu'mina, if you don't mind, if I can add to the
Sure.
hedging as well. There are also other methods are available which are natural hedges. What I mean by that, for example, a company which is large enough, or developers are large enough, where they have operation in more than one country.
That's right.
So they can secure funding from the local countries' currencies, and they're able to distribute the risk vis-a-vis these countries. So these are normal hedges are there. You also can apply netting, for example. So for example, netting your revenues and expenses, making sure they're of the same currencies.
Yes.
By diversifying. You also can do balancing in terms of a natural hedges. So you have asset and liability both in the same currencies. Some people resort to that, some don't, but who does it? They do it very well. Sometimes there's a tricky way of doing it as well, which is a lagging effect. For example, if you need to pay something now, but you know that the currency actually will be favorable in the future, so you would delay and lag your payment now for a future payment to be made, because you may see the exchange rate will become better. But for that, you need to have a strong risk management, because that's a view that you believe that the exchange rate will improve, but it could also go south. So you have to be very careful in that. So these are some of the natural hedges that also companies apply.
We will have some idea from bank perspective as
Yes.
National Bank of Egypt, what are the solutions for renewable energy projects as equity and lending? What are the requirements that will be needed from the company or the project and the bank?
I want to add something about the foreign currencies.
Yes, sure.
First of all, renewable energy projects needs to soft finance. I mean soft finance, especially in development countries. Soft finance here means that interest rate, not commercial rate, but it has to be reduced of in the interest rate compared with the commercial rate. And another thing about the tenor of repayment, it has to be more than the commercial rate.
I would like to have like more information about the interest rate itself, because in different countries they have like different requirements.
Yes, it's different from country to country based on the inflation rate and the interest commercial rate in
Give us an example from Egypt itself.
In Egypt especially, many years ago, we can say 15 years ago, banking system started to build an internal capacity to understand and add renewable investment to our portfolio. And determine the risk related with renewable energy investment, which built through the technical support provided by international financial institutions. They provide the foreign currency with soft finance, and also as a package provide a technical assistance for the bank, and also and from our rule, we refinance the loans to our clients, and also we provide a non-financial service or technical assistance for the client to learn them about the benefits of the renewable energy. And also we build a special department for renewable energy for loans, credit, and also investment.
If we are talking about nowadays, because the inflation rate has raised like more than 20%, maybe the
over than 20%.
Yeah, and the Egyptian pound compared to the dollar, it was changed so much. But how much it will affect the financing for these projects?
As we mentioned, we have to provide the loans for renewable energy project with soft finance. So we have another part, third part, provide support. In case donors, international financial institutions, the World Bank, EBRD, KfW, and also local initiatives like we have in Egypt, Central Bank of Egypt to provide initiative for small enterprises with revenue up to 50 million Egyptian pound last year with 5% simple rate. It's a very soft finance, and the renewable energy project, one of target for this initiative.
Ms. Dolapo, would it be the same case in Nigeria? About the financing, it would be soft as in Egypt?
No. So I
agree with her. And I will add to that after that.
Well, let me say this, that we do enjoy a number of different soft financing mechanisms, what we'd call concessional financing, and we do actually have from our central bank some, concessions. But if you went to the commercial banks, the rates are still quite high. But then you've got certain
How much
kinds
high?
of
Market rate.
we're looking at upwards of 18, 20% if you do commercial loans. So what you often find is this: we do have concessional loans that come from our central bank which are usually single digit in the upwards, close to 10. And then sometimes the central bank on-lends through a commercial bank, so that makes it a bit less. But then you've got some other concessional financing from DFIs, where we have like capital, actually some that actually fund like your capital, your capex. We actually have some grants. So if you look at some projects, you have a blend of financing where you have some grant funding, some technical assistance that kind of brings down the costs, you know. And for a lot of the projects in the mini-grid space, they've had a lot of that kind of financing. From the World Bank, you have results, performance-based grants, for example, where you build to a certain number of connections and you get paid back for that. That's how, at least on the mini-grid side, not on the commercial and industrial side, some in the commercial and industrial space, but on the mini-grid side, we've mostly been financed by some DFI concessional financing. Now, is that sustainable? Can we continue to, can we scale in the way that we need to for that? It's something that we still need to think about. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it will take us to scalability. I mean, we are talking about Nigeria, for example, is a country of over 200 million people. Half of that do not have access. So if you are looking at how we can possibly scale, even though we seem to be doing a little bit well, we need much more than that. So I think our banks and our central banks, our concessional funders, probably need to do a bit more. But I think what's most important is that we have those projects that can actually are sustainable, where we see the revenues coming in and are scalable.
Mu'mina, if I can make it interactive.
Yes,
okay.
of course.
Let's break it to the room, guys. And we just talked about the amount required for financing up to 2030, right? Mm-hmm. We remember the number?
Yes.
$22 trillion to $30 trillion. Do you think commercial bank can lend that globally?
No.
You're actually inviting the board members to be terminated.
Yeah.
Because they have shareholders who need a certain margin to be maintained. Every quarter they're pushed to create a certain revenue number. So what they could do at best, allocate a small portfolio of the entire portfolio they have for a sustainable, renewable, to look good at the end of the report when the investor relationship happened. Look, we did support some renewable things. That's a fact. You cannot get away from it. There's nothing wrong with them. And if you believe that's doable, we invite you to become a chairman of one of the banks. And let's see how long you'll last. Who should support this? It should be supported by development banks.
Yes.
It should be supported by World Bank, by IMF, by IFC. These are the mega trends they need to support. Like they support other development projects, they didn't need to support the renewable project. If really they believe that climate change is a challenge and we're all going to be fired up by end of the century, then they better do some jobs. They have to put their act together and finance these projects at a very comfortable rate so they can support the companies and developers. If they don't do it, it's difficult for these projects to be financed. It's impossible for them to be financed. So that's the true reality. So banks have a limitation of to do something.
Sure. Let's go back to Ms. Dolapo, the role of blended finance and first loss facilities in renewable energy projects. What would be?
So I think just picking up on Mr. Maher's point, indeed, commercial banks are really there to take certain kind of risk, and it's typically construction risk. So it's a limited thing that they can do. So indeed, there's a whole universe of funding that we all need. Now, Mr. Maher mentions the IFC, you know, the World Bank, and they are doing their bit. But I think the entire universe, if you just looked at Africa, and the entire universe of what our needs are and what we need everything. We need everyone, everything putting in, you know, what they can. The fact is that with the IFC, you know, with the World Bank, they can't fund the world. Let me put it that. And I guess that's where we need to, that's where blended finance kind of comes in, where we need a blend of commercial financing, we need a blend of philanthropy, we need DFIs, and that's essentially what blended finance is. So what we're seeing in Nigeria in little bits is that we're seeing instances where an FCDO, for example, says that I will fund a full of projects to the tune of what, maybe 10, I'm just using the figure, 10 million. And what I will do is provide you with first loss. So some of these projects are maybe kind of risky, you know, and...
Risky in terms of what?
Risky in terms of it's either that, let's use the mini-grid space, for example. You are selling to rural areas of people who probably, maybe you find that maybe 20% of them may not be able to match up to their obligations. Mm-hmm. Or it's risky in the sense that it's not either not technology that's proven, or it's not a space or a market that has really has proven revenues. Mm-hmm. So you get a development finance partner who puts in some money, some of which can be lost, and then you get more commercial lenders or more commercial investors to put in money in there as well. We've actually seen this fund a batch of projects that is actually that had actually floated a bond in Nigeria. Small size, not your big projects, but we're seeing a little bit of, and this one of them actually closed last year, where an SPV is set up, and then you then have FCDO, for example, putting in some money, and then you have money coming in from pension funds. These are some of the things that we need to test, you know, and have a big pool of money to be able to fund some of these projects. So yeah, so that's what blended finance is, and we're seeing some of those. And the more that we see some of those projects proven, we hope that we can replicate more and scale more. But there's a lot that goes in there. Just to say that there's a lot that goes in there. There has to be a lot of standardization. Risks must be mitigated to certain barest minimum so that you can have replication of those projects. Yeah.
Would you like to add up anything, Mr. Maher?
No, I agree with Dilapo. I think we require all the hands and efforts in terms of finance, but I think the reality of the matter is we require the big development banks and the international organizations to support, because their kitty is going to be much larger. If I want to give a percentage for us to really digest it and fathom it, it's going to be definitely more than 90%. The other avenues would be also the VCs. The previous discussion that we had prior to this panel, it's a good testament that they've invested more than $400 million on renewable energy projects. So we need more of such VCs, and there are, by the way, and I interact with them. I get a benefit of sitting on the board of many of them. They come to us, and we see a lot of projects, and probably I'll share another project. So we need also a different way of renewable energy. We've been talking about wind and solar for almost 20, 30 years now, but there are other avenues need to come up. I know hydrogen is coming up, the blue and hydrogen, but I think there's other avenues that need to come up, and probably I'll touch upon it at the end.
I was having a walk outside, and it was like kind of making some kind of interviews with the CEOs and chairmen, and I was trying to understand where the budget goes. And I understood that they diverse these budgets toward advanced countries. What about the priority for smaller countries? Do you think that they would have a part of these budgets?
Just to understand your question, you're talking about budgets coming from where?
From private companies, not from governmental ones. Like they are investing billions and billions.
Right. There are 2 points though over here. Usually the VCs, if it's VC or private funding,
yes,
they're also in it for the money. So what are you saying now? They're getting in as an equity partner. So they're getting share in the company, they're becoming investor, they're part owner based on the percentages. So their actually requirement of generating profit is much higher when you compare it to a bank. So a bank may charge you a certain range of profit, anything between, depending on the country you are at, depending on the exchange rate you have and so forth. So it will be much smaller, maybe 3 times smaller than the investor who's coming in, who's looking for an X amount on his investment. So what they go after, one, is the viability of the project itself, the idea of itself. It's at what stage the idea is. Mm-hmm. So they will not really go based on jurisdiction, they'll go anywhere. So I've seen VCs going anywhere, like in Africa, I've worked with at least 10 of them, that they went to the African market because the projects were viable. Of course, they had many more projects elsewhere, like in Europe and US, but that's a sheer of number of projects happening. So they're driven by the viability of the project. Second, it's the exposure and the awareness. So if the projects are not really in the front light, it will be very difficult for VC to come up. So that's why when I attend the VC forums related to energy, if they can come over there and present their case, this is where the big VCs will get to know them and they'll be able to investigate and then invest. So it's not really per se per economy, but what play a role as an overarching is the stability, the political stability of the country itself, because they want to preserve also the investment they're trying to do. So of course that will become one of the investment criteria that they will look at. How stable is the country, regime, change of power, and so forth.
Of course. Let's get back to you, Mr. Mohsen. Now we understand the risks for the banks, for the projects, but what can do from the bank side, financing these projects, renewable energy projects, to ramp up at least in the next few years, at least if they are having some kind of target to 2030 or 2050?
Yes. For renewable energy, there are several ways to finance, but from bank perspective,
yes.
We should do classes for renewable energy, especially stations. So we have a small renewable energy station up to 2 megawatts, that we can finance it other traditional ways. And we have medium stations up to 7, and over 7 we can classification as a classification as a large. For medium and large investment renewable energy, the project developer establish a special purpose vehicle to construct and also operate the station for his client. This is special method for medium and large power station and applying already in Egypt, and we finance these projects in this way. And also for international financial institutions supporting the development of this sector for clients and also for banks, as I mentioned before, through 2 ways, soft finance and also for providing technical assistance.
I saw that you were nodding your head. Do you agree, especially for projects in Africa itself?
Do I agree with what exactly in terms of what government's role should be?
Yes.
I'm of the view that government's role should be to enable financing in these projects and to enable the projects also move. I think one of the reasons why, and I'm just speaking to Maher's contribution about when you were asking the question, what determines the decision? Why do companies choose to go into one country and not to another? One of the reasons from a project perspective is how long does it take to do projects? You know, if you started a project in a country, how long, if it had to take you 5 years in one country and it had to take you 2 in another, you know, which one would you go to? I mean, water follows the path of least resistance, so does money. So where you have the path of least resistance and you have, you know, less challenges, you would go that way. So I'm a firm believer that government should enable, and sometimes that enablement can also come in form of funding that also gives technical assistance and also facilitates and kind of catalyzes capital. So I think that for governments in Africa and, with the huge deficit that we have, I think that we should put more of our funds more towards catalyzing that capital and making sure that that capital comes. So any obstacles that are in the way, for example, whether it's project planning, whether it's permits, whether it's licensing, whether it's land issues and land permits, those kinds of things should be made easier. So it's easier for projects to be done.
Mr. Maher.
All right. Again, let's go back to the overarching things as well for banks to finance.
Yeah.
There are, of course, various instruments the banks will require as well to secure the finance. So, the typical one is your letter of guarantees, letter of LC, LC's letter of credit as well required to make sure the project is secure in place. But I think the very important essence, first of all, for these renewal projects to work, you need to make sure, and I think it's been mentioned by the previous panel as well, and the more we echo it, the more we'll probably push to make things happen, is the regulation. If you don't have right regulation for things to happen, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to finance because you, as a project owner, you'll have a risk of making sure this project will be viable. What if the country does not support renewable, or not because they don't want to, but they don't have a regulation where the offtake agreements can be there? So your project itself becomes expensive for the bank, and that goes for the project planning itself by the bank. So the banks are today have to do so much of due diligence. You've heard them saying that they now have created the department for renewable energy. I remember in my previous organization, Citibank, when we used to finance any project, whether it's an airline industry, anything, we used to have somebody flying in from UK just to give you a macro perspective of the aviation industry globally before we can finance one plane to the region over here.
Finance one?
One plane.
Oh.
Similarly, when you're financing a renewable project, you need to have a macro vision of the technology you're financing today. Is it really viable or not? Is it really happening as a mainstream, or they are detrimental to the infected? Because the R&D about any new technology will take time before they evolve. So that makes a lot of pressure on bank. So I keep on saying again and again, you need to have the mega development banks, the state development bank come into place, the interstate development bank need to come and play, IMF need to come and play, World Bank, IFC, all these need to come to play to make a project viable for it to work. Otherwise, we are kidding ourselves. I'll be very frank, and I'll keep on repeating it till these people hear me up and they start acting.
Let's talk about also the donors, the international development institutions and the local initiatives. This is like a very important part of financing the renewable energy projects.
True.
Yes, but it's different from national projects and SME, small and medium
Let's talk about both, of course.
Yes, for national projects, maybe the borrower, the government, like Ministry of Energy, and we have, they need a bank in between the donor, or international financial institutions, and the Ministry of the Energy. And for small and medium enterprises, we should design a templates lending, mentioned all the features of the loans, like the interest rate, the tenor, the purpose, and also the guarantees and documents. It's templates lending for small and very small projects. As I mentioned, maybe all these projects, national projects and private sector in medium and small projects can finance it through the donors, and also through the initiatives provided by the central bank of the country. Like in Egypt, we have initiative for 5% simple rate. And we can provide some examples, especially for SME projects like heating. We have project in Egypt with UNIDO, with using in hotels and factories, and also in agriculture, especially in irrigation. And also all projects produce the component which needed for the renewable energy projects. And for national projects, like wide projects, like solar energy projects, we have in Egypt, we are lucky. As a wide atlas, we have availability to a promising area with high wide speed, which we can establish and measure projects in this areas. And also for solar energy, Egypt is one of some plate countries. So we have high potential to establish mega projects, and we have the biggest project for solar energy in Aswan. Project is named Banan. Banan project in Aswan area.
I would like to leave like between 5 to 7 minutes for questions. We have 13 minutes left, so let's wrap up the subject,
Sorry,
the risks and the
Bimban, sorry.
Bimban. Let's wrap up the subject between the risks, securing revenues, between the banks and the renewable projects.
Sure. You've asked us a lot of questions, so it's my time to ask a question. I'm going to ask you guys, if you don't mind. How many of us, by show of hands, believe by 2050 will become net zero carbon emission? 1, 2, almost nobody. With all due respect to 3 of you guys. You see, this is what I echoed. Unless we take this matter seriously, it's not going to happen, because you really require mega players on these things. There are 2 points I'd like to add. One is an important one is a soft one. The important one is we require different technologies. Again, I would mention we require nuclear technology, which we've been deprived from, but I'm not talking about traditional nuclear technology, which is really very harmful. We're talking about a safe nuclear technology. Now, I had a chance to speak to one of them. We're working on a project in Canada. This is the only private company globally actually tied up with Canadian government, CNL, Canadian nuclear laboratory, which has never happened before. So a government tying up with a private. What they do, they actually use the technology of MMR moduling, which is micro modular of nuclear. It's a very safe technology. It can be actually underground for about 2 meter width, 6 meter height, and you can light up the entire area. So you don't have to have mega-like projects. We built, like, for example, Al Baraka plant. We talk about it. But these are traditional. It requires a lot of operation cost. They pay back, take a very long time. And that's why you have to have a state sponsorship. But I think we require to develop and push the safest nuclear technology and other technology which is coming up. The softer note I would like to know, given that we're talking about a lot now about hydrogen and hydro and green, perhaps the project sponsor or the project directors would like to amend the colors of the logo of the Middle East Energy Forum, and by adding a green and a blue.
Well, what about you, Ms. Dolapo?
Okay, so I think to your question, Mr. Maher, about, if we believe, I think this thing about a net zero 2050, I think each country needs to look at what it's going to be like for them. And I think perhaps maybe when we say net zero, are we actually saying zero fossil fuels?
No.
Or are we saying cleaner fossil fuels, or
or zero commission,
or yes, or mitigating that, or making it cleaner, and a hybrid of other fuels? I think everybody needs to, when we do say net zero, are we saying total elimination? Is that what it's going to be? And I think every country, or perhaps every continent, or perhaps every region needs to decide what that is going to be. But you were asking me about securitization.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and best practices. So I'm just going to talk about securitization from a very, not in the capital market sense is one, but securitization across electricity markets, and maybe using Nigeria as an example. And hopefully where we hope to be. So in terms of securitization, I'm just looking at, how we can, from a financing perspective, secure revenues. And we've tried to do a number of things in Nigeria, not totally successful, from the plain vanilla financing where you'd have, finance given, and on that project, the project to be ring-fenced, and then you have all the revenues secured, such that, lenders are able to get their money back. That's one level. Another level will be when you're looking at a market, for example, and then you have to ensure that, the different players in the market get what they should be getting in the market, whether on the utility side, on the gas side, when we're dealing with gas, like a country like Nigeria, on the transmission side, all the different service providers. And then we have one market in which money is shared. And we've tried to do different things in Nigeria to be able to secure the revenues that are gotten across the market so that everybody in the market is able to get what they need to, what they should be getting. And underlying that, obviously, our contracts should be contracts that are enforceable, which we've tried as a country to, which we are still trying as a country to be able to have contracts that are, enforceable. Underlying that is also cost-reflective tariffs that obviously can give you an adequate return. I think that from an electricity market perspective is where we as Africa, and I would say Nigeria, need to be getting to. But there's then a higher one in terms of if we are looking at best practice. And that's for us to then start to actually have securitized revenues around projects and markets such that institutional investors can invest. And that's when we're talking about floating bonds and all of that, where we can have a bunch of, assets that are producing revenues. And I know that that's being done in Europe or, and in other countries. That's where in Africa we are hoping to get, if we are hoping to get the revenues that are the money that we require to build these projects, where we actually have, pools of projects that have stable revenues, have contracts that are enforceable, and then you can have institutional investors invest in that, to be able to also, develop more projects. So those are some of the things that we hope that we can get into to be able to get to where we want.
I know we're going to be stealing, but I'd like to add something. But Dilapa, with your permission, just those who are not bankers, what do we mean by securitization in a very layman term? You've got a project, the revenues of 20 years, for example, X millions of dollars, you say, I will securitize it for you, i.e., against that revenue, which future revenue is going to have, I'm going to give it to you as a loan, provided that these revenues are studied well, secure, coming in on time, you believe you've done the due diligence. So the advantages for the project owner, he gets the money ahead of time in a very layman term. It's a very large topic, very beautiful topic, and a very good, interesting instrument for banks to use. Can I add one more thing? But what? No, there's no but. No, I want to just clarify on the net zero. When we say about net zero by 2050, we're not going to saying that, we're not emitting any carbons. It's impossible. We as human beings are emitting carbons, by the way. Do we know that, right? Yeah. We use gadgets. What we're talking about is how do we make sure that the carbon emission we're doing and about the technology that we're going to be using in the future, how do we neutralize that? I'll give an example. There's a technology available today, and it's slowly spreading. It's still in the nascency. They actually suck the carbon from the air through fans. Literally, there's a company in Canada called Carbon Engineering. So they actually take a ton of, per day, they take 1 ton of carbon every day, and then through a chemical process, they come up with it and precipitate from that thing a carbon calcium carbonated pellets. They take these pellets, they heat it up, and they come up with CO2. The two things can go for the CO2. Either they go and bury it underground, under the surface of the crust, or they mix it up with hydrogen to create fuel for vehicles. And then the vehicles can use this carbon, and then carbon will be emitted again. So they took the carbon, and the carbon emitted. This is called carbon neutral. Because that's what we meant by 2050. So we will be taking the carbon out, and whatever we produce, it will be equal. But there'll still be carbon in the air. That's what we're trying to say.
Of course. Thank you for this addition. We have 4 minutes left. If anybody would like to ask a question, yes, please.
Hi. I would like to ask you a rather technical question.
All the technical question to him.
Yeah.
Technical financial.
No, I can tell you technical.
Is there any government support, not on the project level, but on the bank level, for example, to decrease, I don't know, capital requirements or provide some tax incentives, something that decreases financing for project in future? Thank you.
You're welcome. You would like to take it?
Supporting from government? Yes, government can support in several ways, like in interest rate, reducing interest rate compared with the commercial rate, and also they can provide the land to build projects for renewable energy, so wind or solar energy. And also can provide incentives in tasks and labor insurance like that. They have several ways to support renewable energy, and it different from country to country. Each country has its case, its economic ratios, its environmental issues. It's different from country to country. Development country compared with industrial countries. It's each country has its case, but there are several ways to support in case they believe that important for several positive impact, environmental and social and economic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I was one of the 2 people that raised their hand believing in 2050 net zero.
Good luck.
And I believe a lot in not just the supply side, but demand side. Mr. Mahir, you were already mentioning about technologies. We are working on a combined project, solar with energy efficiency, where the energy efficient motors that we do have a track record of 58% cutting the electricity. So we try to make the ROI more attractive to get the private sector in. Is that potentially a model that you think could be scaled to attract more private money, because the ROI will be much faster than a conventional renewable energy project?
Sure, certainly. But I think what the spin we require and we miss all the time is the data. We got enough data available, but they're not stored today. For example, we talked about the grid in the previous one, right? How do I make sure, how do I offset the grid? For example, you've got one house, not a mainstream, in Switzerland today. They're producing 800 times more than the electricity required by their own house. We need some more houses like that. When you know, for example, another data point, when I know what is the lean energy period vis-a-vis the high energy period, I actually, through a data and gridding system, I can say, okay, pump in energy now more to this house because the requirement based on my previous data is now this much. You're actually making efficient use of it. Also, the previous panel talked about the storage. The storage capacity today, if we can expand that and we have a better technology, we will be, the vehicles, for example, the vehicles are going on wheels. These motions, we can be used as a storage to generate electricity and pump it up. So there's a lot of things can happen, not only one thing, but I agree to what you said, which will make a lot of sense as well.
Can we have more 2 minutes?
Thank you very
please.
much.
Okay. My name is Hayo. I'm the president for the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria. And it's been great listening to this panel. I've really learned a lot. Egypt, you guys have been buzzing all the way in Africa, and we're trying to find a way to catch up to you. So 2 questions, one for the Egypt, for Dr. Moshen. How have you been able to help in the FX risk, for the developers in terms of helping them for their projects, most especially when you're funding for projects that have future, inflow? The second one for Mr. Okabi, how can we work together to, because Nigeria has got great, market. I mean, we have 210 million people. We're currently about 92 million that is off grid. So how can we work together to find innovative instruments that we can leverage on as developers to be able to expand and to do more for renewable energy in Nigeria. We're currently big at hydro. I think we've been able to do about 20% of the hydro potential we have. We have potential for geothermal, which Kenya is currently tapping that we're not tapping around our basins. We have potential for wind, you know, along our shorelines, and also the Northern Lights. So we've got some buckets of components of potentials that we have, and we need to be able to leverage on some of the innovative instruments you've been talking about. I've been listening to it. And how can we achieve this to a scale? We've got very ambitious goal, energy transition plan by 2060. We want to have been able to get to net zero, and we've cost to be needing $410 billion above the usual spending between now and then. So how can we get such instruments?
I think he took our 2 minutes.
First, about the waste.
Please.
First question about to handle, how to handle and finance the waste project. Yes? Okay.
Foreign exchange.
Yes. Waste projects, it's one of, that's your question.
Can you again
Foreign
repeat?
exchange risk.
Foreign exchange.
Foreign exchange, sorry. Foreign exchange risk, we have financial tools how to deal with foreign exchange risk, like hedging and all tools under umbrella of derivatives. It's financial tools. We use it to reduce the risk of foreign exchange risk. Because we already we borrow the loan from donors in foreign currency, and we refinance in local currency. And we have to repayment with foreign currency based on the repayment schedule. So we use, as I mentioned, the financial tools for hedge the risk.
Quickly from my side, we can exchange business, but I can tell you what we're trying to do. We're building a plant in Abu Dhabi, which is in the government, along with the government partnership, where we take used cooking oils and we produce biofuel, and those biofuel can be blended, can be used for airline jetting, can be used by marine services, can be used by truckers, can be used by factories as well. I'm also going middle of this month to CIU countries, exploring the same thing. We've been invited to actually visit them along with the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, and then we can discuss further if you would like to.
I would like to thank all the panelists, Ms. Dolapo Kokoyi, Mr. Mohsen Abu Bakr, Mr. Maher Al-Kaabi. Thank you all for all the additions and the comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending this panel. It was a pleasure to have you here.